Hello there and welcome to episode 3 of The Tyre Kickers, the classic car podcast that's a safe space for car nerds. I'm Matt.
And I'm Max. Every episode we pick cars from all over the internet and argue about the best spec, the biggest engines and the worst wheels.
Coming up this episode, see it, want it, the gorgeous Mercedes Pagoda SL. But in terms of getting one, is there any logic behind the lust?
And the rust. Also, we ask if American cars really work here in Britain and subject the mighty Ford Capri to our crush it or caress it challenge. Is the Essex heartthrob worth saving, or should we crush it to make a new dishwasher?
So fill up with 4-star, collect your Tiger tokens, and let's fire up episode 3 of The Tyre Kickers. So here we are again then, episode 3, and so far, so good. I think we're still motoring. Thank you for all the positive reactions to episode 2 as well. Hold on a minute. Well, I say positive, let's rephrase that and call it largely positive. Because we've actually, Max, got our first complaint. One listener reckons you've got your facts wrong.
That is pretty insulting, although perfectly possible, to be honest, and probably on the scale of highly likely.
Well, let's read out the details of the allegation. Elliot, who goes by the handle @VeraLandy on Instagram, says this. So he says, as the owner of a 1964 Land Rover, can I get a bit ranty about Max's use of the term Series Defender in episode 1? Now, he says Land Rover's only got called Defender from 1990 onwards. So there's no such thing as a Series Defender. Anyway, rant over, looking forward to the next episode. Now, a couple of worrying things there, Max, for me. One, you've upset the Defender people. And two, you've always told me you know your Defenders. I've trusted you on this knowledge because I've got very little knowledge about that. Giving me and the listeners of this duff information.
Well, you said I've upset the Defender people. I haven't upset the Defender people at all. I've upset the Land Rover Series people, which are a completely different group of people with slightly better anoraks. The Defenders, more modern ones, Series are the older ones. Why don't I give you a history lesson, actually? What about this? I think you'd appreciate this, wouldn't you? The entire history of the Land Rover. How about this?
No. Can I just stop you there?
Okay, no. We'll start in 1948, the Land Rover 80-inch wheelbase.
We're trying to get listeners, not shoo them away.
Matt, take a seat, have a break, have a sip of coffee. This list is really important. This is the history of the Land Rover, and this is something you really need to know. So 1948, the Land Rover 80-inch wheelbase was launched. That eventually became the Series 1. 1954, the 109-inch long wheelbase introduced. Short wheelbase went from 80 to 86 inches. 57, the 88-inch wheelbase introduced. 58, the Series 2 was launched, and then hot on its heels in 1961, the Series 2A. 71, the Series 3 launched. That's my favourite. By now, the lights were on the outside of the front wings. 1983, the 109-inch wheelbase becomes the 110. 1984, the Series 3 becomes the coil-sprung 90. Then in 1990, the 90 and 110 become the Defender, and then the Defender goes until 2016. So, Land Rover Series models, then the 90, then the 110, then the Defender. Now, what I think we should really do, and this would break the internet, is discuss the best Land Rover engines, Matt. The 2.25 petrol, the 200, 300 TDI, the mighty TD5, the Puma TDCi. What about this? And the various V8 engines, of course. Do you want to do that? Are you up for that?
Not really. I think I'm just about staying awake after that list there. I think we have actually found a cure for insomnia. Elliot, thank you for dropping us that line. It's always nice to clear these things up, isn't it? A couple of other quick bits of listener reacts, Max.
Last episode, we had a listener in Spain. This week, it's New Jersey. Russell messaged to say he was listening and enjoying the podcast. Cheers, Russ. If you're overseas and listening, please do drop us a line. Tell us where from and what you're driving.
And also Ruth from Elan PR on Instagram said about episode 2 going live, how exciting, I'm saving it for a drive down south. Yeah, that's a good call, actually. I do like a podcast while driving. It sort of eats the journey up. Well, do keep those comments coming in. Let us know about what you think about any aspects of the show. Just add the comments on our Instagram. That's probably the easiest way to do it. It's great to read them. We are at the Tyre Kickers UK.
Right, so we've been busy this week with our classic cars. I had to get my 912 to a service. Now, it's been off the road for 2 or 3 months in storage, just where the salt's been washed off the road. And, of course, it wouldn't start. I mentioned that last episode, so I tried to sort it out this episode, which involved getting some fuel and pouring it down some pipes directly into the fuel pump. Now, I started doing this and then realised, actually, this is a bit risky doing this in a garage, isn't it? So I pushed it outside, got the fuel pipes off, and then poured fuel right down the pipe straight into the pump, connected it back up again, cranked it over. Amazingly, it started. Got all the way down the M4, and that is a bit of a brown trouser moment, to be honest, on the smart motorways. No hard shoulder, classic car, not run for 3 months, pouring fuel down into the fuel pump and then off down the M4. And it's a little bit scary, to be honest, because you don't have anywhere to go. There's nowhere to break down. So I was watching the temperature gauge very closely. So I've almost broken down 5 times on the M4. What about you, Matt? Something safer?
Yes, my car's still in storage, so I haven't got the worry yet of breaking down. I've been to a couple of different things. I did a quick whiz around Brooklands yesterday just to kill an hour or so and see what was there. I went to Sussex and went to a new place called Talk Moto Cafe, which I think you might enjoy. It's one of these sort of new breeds of car and coffee kind of places. Weather was pretty rubbish, but a few cars turned up. Really good place, though. It's got good coffee, food, and racing memorabilia all over the walls. Good feel to the place, and I'd quite like to go back when the weather is better. It's down in Horsham in Sussex, but there's quite a few of these sort of places popping up now, Max, aren't there?
Yeah, they're really good, to be honest, because I think some of them are using old pubs that have gone out of business. So actually turning it into a cafe where you can go with your car is a fantastic idea. I've got Caffeine and Machine near me just outside Stratford, and that's fantastic. So busy. And you can just go there for a cup of coffee and just wander around the car parks and have a look at stuff. It's a really, really good idea.
So looking forward to the season starting. I'm getting fed up with the rain and the cold. I want to get the car out. And the other thing I just quickly did...
Get it out, honestly. Get it out.
I'm not getting it out.
The salt's off the road. It's fine.
It's too wet. I don't want the tin
It's so
worm.
soft. Get it out.
I do need to put some fuel in it, actually. I forgot to put some fuel stabilizer. When I put it in for storage in October, I just ran out of time with everything. I thought I must pump the wheels up and I must put some fuel stabilizer in. Of course, I didn't. Neither of those things. I just shoved it in the storage place. So I think I might treat it to a squirt of 99 and just turn it over, see if it still goes. The other thing, did you watch the Manor Park Classics previews that were on over the weekend? There was a sale on, and Paul Cowland did his really good previews. They're great. They're just like a real anorak fest, those things.
I did. And did you notice that Paul is a fan of the TR7? So you are now outnumbered because both Paul and I like a TR7. He said it was a design classic. I said it was a design classic. You don't, but you're wrong.
Well, we'll take one each because you're wrong on Land Rover Defenders. I'm happy to be wrong on TR7s. If you haven't seen those, go and check them out on YouTube on Manor Park Classics. Paul does really good sort of walk-arounds of all the cars and stuff. Grab a cup of tea, stick it on a TV or stick it on a screen and just watch it and enjoy it. Okay, onwards and forwards, time for one of our regular features, See It, Want It. This is where you spot a car and then the lust takes over and you're blind to the rust. Well, this week, the car we're saying we've seen and we want is the Mercedes Pagoda SL. But does it warrant the lust, or are they now just overpriced trophy cars?
So just to be clear, this is the W113, 230, 250 and 280 SL from 1963 to 1971, nicknamed the Pagoda because of the concave hardtop shape.
So is this the prettiest car in the world? Well, it's one that I've lusted after for a while. I know you have, Max. We've sat in them before at auctions. The prices have gone mental, though. Does it still hold up to everything?
We've actually stalked these cars, haven't we? We like them so much. We've stood around at various auctions and just stood there staring at them silently going, I want it. But I do really think these are great cars, but they've become so expensive. That's one of the big problems about the Pagodas now, just the cost.
Yeah, we've got some examples to look at, which I'll talk you through. But I just found this clip on YouTube, and it's of an old Top Gear, I think realistically, about 15, 20 years old. And it's a clip of Jeremy Clarkson. Listen to what he says about the prices.
You can buy a good one today for £25,000 to £30,000. And a bad one for 10,000 or so.
Now, those were the days. 25 to 35,000. Forget it now. I mean, what are they going for now?
Well, if we have a look at these ones which we've picked out from the classifieds, this is a 1967 Mercedes 250 SL, so the one that was made between 67 and 68. They introduced the four-wheel disc brakes on it, and it had the 2.5 engine. This is in royal blue, right-hand drive, 89,000 miles. And this is £94,000. Now, it's a beautiful car, but it's £94,000. And they weren't particularly advanced. They were very pretty, but the engine was just a standard Mercedes inline six with a standard fuel injection. It was based on the old W111 saloon. So they're not that advanced a car, but they're just very pretty. What I don't get now is how expensive they are. But that is nice, isn't it?
It's very, very nice. It's almost like £1 a mile, though, isn't it? 89,000 miles, 94 grand. When did they get so expensive? I mean, this is a beautiful looking car. As you say, it's in dark, deep blue. It's got those really nice, what are they called, those color-coded wheel covers. There's a name for them. They're not the Mexican hats. They're the other ones.
I think they're just called color-coded wheel covers.
No, it'd be called something in German. But this is, it ticks the boxes. It's got a blue mohair roof and that sort of thing. But just the price. When did they get so expensive? And also, when other classic cars sort of leveled out, why have they stayed so pricey?
I don't know. I think it might be the restoration costs because they're all welded together. So they've got no bolt-on panels. So if you have to restore them, it can cost you 100, 150,000. And here is our next example, which is an illustration of that. Now, this is a 1968 280 SL, which was the last engine offered in these. Beautiful car, silver, fully restored. Bear in mind, the unrestored one was 95,000. This restored one is £289,950. That is a huge amount of money, £300,000 effectively for one of these. I don't know when they got so expensive. I'm guessing it's just restoration costs.
It's a 1968 Mercedes £280,000 SL, isn't it? That's the problem with it. That's nuts. I think that becomes a trophy car that was parked on a plinth and you look at, unless you've got so much money you just don't care. I don't get it. I mean, is that purely the cost of the restoration, trying to claw it back, or how does it leap stratospherically from 90,000, which is a lot of money, to like 300,000?
I don't get it. I'm guessing it is that restoration cost, and I'm guessing there's not that many right-hand drive ones around, and the 280 SLs are the ones to have. I do think also that they're quite expensive to fix the interior. There's lots of interior bits that are on different models that are difficult to source, and if you break them, they're quite expensive. And I do think sometimes they're quite complex, even just things like the wiper motor. If that goes wrong, you have to take the dashboard out to fix it. And the same with some of the heaters. If the heater goes wrong, it's a huge job to fix. And then there's the bodywork. I did see one that was being restored once, and it was just like it had been shot by a 12-bore shotgun. It just had so many holes in it. And because it's a whole thing, you have to fix the whole body. So, yeah, restoration costs. But it is a nice-looking car, but is it worth that money? I think it's become part of the classic car bubble scene, is that it's got into the hand of dealers who put POA on and don't tell you the price and start referring to it as a motor car. And it's got to that posh level now of cars that it's kind of inaccessible, which is a shame because it's a thing of beauty and it should be shared.
Yeah, it's got the feeling of a sort of city bonus car now, which is a little bit of a shame, because if you listen to that Jeremy Clarkson clip, they're 25 to 35,000 for a good one. Now they're 90,000, 100,000 for a good one. I'm not sure I could justify that. This was always the car that I always said to myself, do you know what? If I came into some money, I would go out and buy a Pagoda. That's the car that I would like. It does everything for me. It's as a 6-footer, it's wider than your average 60s car. It's just, the inside just oozes 60s, but classy 60s. But the prices are bonkers now. And I just think, for me, it takes the enjoyment out of it a little bit. And I couldn't justify. I think you've got to be on serious city bonus to justify £290,000 for something that if you shopped around, you could potentially get the same thing. Although it's always that argument, isn't it? Do you want nut and bolt or do you want usable classic? And I think that's the difference. But I don't think, if we look at that first one again, which is a dark blue one, 95,000, is usable classic if you've got very, very deep pockets and you're not bothered about that. For most people, though, that's not a usable classic. That's potentially one that you do worry about a little bit more, and you do worry about getting scratched. In every single episode of it so far, I've talked about my worry about classic cars. It's not really that. I just think I quite like a usable car. I still want my car to be pristine and the paintwork to be fantastic, and I don't want to damage it and all that sort of stuff. But I think once you'll start piloting £1,000 classic car around and parking it in a pub car park, do you start worrying about it? Maybe it's to do with your budget, I guess.
Well, I think that's the point, isn't it? That you and I have approached our cars in the past with a set of spanners and screwdrivers, and we've done that because we thought, well, how much damage can we do? Answer, quite a lot. But we're not going to break the bank, are we? We might break the car, we won't break the bank. Here, I wouldn't even touch that because it's just so expensive, and you might think, oh, look at the value. The value is going to go down if I approach it. And I think this is the problem. It's a great car. It's a lovely car. It's not that special. You know, mechanically, it's not that special. Bodily, it's pretty, but it's not that special. But it's so expensive. And I don't think I would take that out that much, to be honest, at £100,000, even the cheaper one. I think it's too much money to enjoy. There's a debate about that, because obviously that depends on how much money you've got. But even if you've got a lot, I think driving around something between £100,000 and £300,000, you're not going to park that in the supermarket car park when you go get some shopping. And then it ends up in the garage, in a carcoon, being stored, being looked after and not running. And that's a shame.
And part of that fun of running a classic round in the summer is just popping out and taking it down the supermarket, or doing the runs with it, or taking it into town or whatever. Maybe you lose a bit of that if the car is too expensive, just taking it to some very posh shows. Do you think they're worth the money? I mean, how much was that? We were looking at left hookers. What were they going for at that auction we looked at last year?
There was a red one, wasn't it, that had been restored, and I think that went for about 80 to 90,000, and even that's a lot for a left hooker. I mean, the good thing about a left-hand drive car in these Pagodas is that they're reliable enough, so you could drive them to France and you could go abroad in them and you could have a really good time because, you know, the mechanics are pretty good on these. They don't tend to go wrong that much.
It's still a 55-year-old car, though, isn't it? I mean, you know, 55-year-old cars do go wrong.
The fuel injection, though, was developed by the man who developed a fuel injection for the Messerschmitt Bf 109. Who then went to work for Daimler-Benz. So it's been tested.
Sorry, what?
The fuel injection system. It's had some fair testing. But I know what you mean. It is an old car, but I think you could take that to the continent and have a good time in it.
I still want one. I just don't want to pay that price. Do you see the prices coming down at all ever?
It would be nice, wouldn't it? And I do see the prices of most classic cars falling at the moment. I just think these are now seen as some kind of investment car. And as soon as they get the investment car tag, it kind of ruins it for the rest of us. I do have a solution though, Matt. I've got a solution for you that you can have the design with all of the fun. Now, if you look at this one, this is a W115 Mercedes Saloon from 1971. So clearly, it's not a Mercedes Pagoda. It's got 4 doors and it's the Saloon. But you're getting all the design language from the Pagoda, but just in something that is a lot cheaper. And it's up for $11,995.
Yeah, we'll describe it a bit more, actually. So imagine a sort of classic Mercedes Saloon with those sort of stacked headlights. Do you call them stacked headlights? But they're sort of long.
They're upright headlights, aren't they?
Upright headlights, that's it. I knew you had all the technical jargon for it. White wall tyres, this one. It's chrome everywhere. But yeah, I mean, what are the price? What are we looking at for this? $11,995.
Yeah, so this is a 220 petrol, so it's got the 2000cc 4-cylinder engine in it. It's the classic kind of Berlin taxi of the 1970s, and that's, I think, where people would recognise it from. But you are getting that beautiful line of the Mercedes. You get virtually the same interior. As long as you don't look at the back seats, you might notice they're a bit bigger than in a Pagoda. But you do get that look, and I think that is a car for us to appreciate the design without having to worry about doing any work to it ourselves, driving it around. I think that's a real bargain.
Yes, you haven't got the convertible, obviously, but as you say, it's got the same sort of design language. You know, inside looks very, very similar, same sort of steering wheel, gauges, same sort of seats. It just hasn't got that price tag. I mean, we were talking about the Jag last week, weren't we? The Jag Mark II was a sort of, if you could look at it as a more fun E-Type, because you get your mates in and take them down the pub. It's very similar with this, isn't it? You know, your Pagoda, you're going to take one friend down. This, you could probably bundle 4 in and take them down the pub for $11,995. That sounds great.
And if you open the windows, you can kid yourself you're in a convertible. I was going to say close your eyes when you're driving, but not a great idea. But just open the windows. You get the same feel to it. This is a manual, so I think it's slightly better than the autos in most of the Pagodas. And they handle quite well. They look really good. And they're relatively cheap to run because they're quite simple mechanics. So I think that is a really good buy. I'd love a Pagoda. I can't afford one, sadly, and that makes me a bit bitter.
Yeah, I think this is a really good alternative. I would want the auto, I think. I think old Mercedes do suit a sort of slushy auto. For me, personally, I can't be bothered to change gears, but I think that would swing it for me. If I had an auto, I'd probably go and look at that now and find some room for it afterwards. I still, though, lust after a Pagoda and I would want one, but I think unless the prices start tumbling, I just can't justify it. Because the other thing is, you look at that, yes, it's £100,000, and if you suddenly £100,000 fell out of the sky, you could buy it. But actually, when you start looking at the alternatives, like you say, you could probably have 2 or 3 things. And you could use 2 or 3 things for different stuff and have a bit more fun with them.
And that's the problem, isn't it? £100,000 these days is a lot of classic cars, and you can have a lot of fun with those. Whereas with the Pagoda, you would have fun, obviously, but you'd be also a bit worried about it. So I think any car that now gets into that investment category, you kind of have the fun taken out of it. I think it's a great car to look at. I'll continue to just look at them at auctions and dribble slightly when they're in front of me because they are so gorgeous. But until those prices come down, I think that might be a bit of a miss.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's carry on looking at the auctions. And if I see any cheap ones at the auctions, I'll make sure you're looking the other way and I'll bid for them.
So up next, American cars in Britain. Think the Dodge Charger parked outside the Boar's Nest in the Dukes of Hazzard.
Or maybe Steve McQueen's Mustang in Bullets.
Or Burt Reynolds and his Trans Am in Smokey and the Bandit. There's no denying American cars are cool in America.
But do they really work in the UK with narrow lanes, tiny car park spaces and expensive fuel?
Because while you see them at shows and they look good, does rocking up in a slab of Americana give off a whiff of square dancing and cowboy boots? And can you ever recreate the Route 66 on the A46? I would argue this is a bit of a problem for American cars. I love American cars in America. I think in the UK, do they look a little bit sad? Is that risky?
It depends. I think there's certain American cars that you look at and go, wow. And there's some American cars you look at and go, whoa. It's a bit of a scene. I think there's a split, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I think there's some that turn up at shows and you are looking at them thinking, actually, do you know what? I quite fancy that. And it's good dimensions and just a good car, sounds great, normally V8. And there's some that turn up like a wardrobe on wheels. And I'm not sure. What have you got? Let's chew the fat on these. Have you got some examples?
Yeah, let's have a look at this one first of all. It's a 1959 Cadillac Coupe. So it's a 2-door coupe with all the fins. This is what I think you think of in your head when you think of that 1950s American design. It's got the bullet tail lights. It just looks gorgeous. But it's about 6 meters long. It's about 2 meters longer than one of the new Range Rovers. It's huge. And while I like to see it, I wouldn't like to drive it.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where I think beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, it's very 50s Americana, as you say, fins, pointy tail lights, lots of chrome. It does look a little bit like the Batmobile, and these are the sorts of cars that turn up and they just don't really do anything for me. I think they're of a time and they're dated and they just don't really appeal to me, although they have got their appeal. These are the sort of American cars that kind of don't do it.
Yeah, it's just too big, isn't it? I don't know how you drive that around Britain, but there are American cars you can drive in Britain and not look a complete idiot. For example, a 1976 Chevy Corvette Stingray. Well, it's not actually a Stingray, it's a C3, but it's a Targa Top 350 Ci. Now, these were all over the 1970s films. What do you think about this? It's in black, it's a Chevy, so it's got loads and loads of parts, and it's kind of normal sized for an American car. Would you drive one of those?
Yeah, I think it's nice. I prefer the one before, which is the Corvette C2, which is a 60s one. And that I've sat in one of those, and that's gorgeous. This, though, what are we looking at? Oh, it's up for an auction price, guide price 12 to 15,000. So that's quite a lot of fun for that sort of money. Look at the interior, very, very vinyl. Everywhere, black vinyl. It's not massively doing it for me. What about you?
I quite like them. It's the right size. They're not complicated. There's lots of Corvette parts. The fact it's a Corvette is pretty good anyway. Like you, I prefer the Stingray, the C2, before it. It's still quite a good car, this, though. And I do think for the money, it's a Targa top, so you can get the wind in your hair. You can look like Burt Reynolds. I quite like them. But then again, I'm not sure I would drive one. Now, one thing I would drive, and this is a bit left field, so you have to stick with me here, but I always like the Blues Brothers, and I like the idea of the cop car being a really tough car. So if you look at this one, this is a 2011 Ford Crown Victoria. Now, this was the cop car in America for 20 years, and it was also the taxi in New York. These cars are virtually indestructible. They're so tough, and they've got so many parts. So I'm just wondering, if you had a kind of black and white Ford Crown Vic, you took all the police stuff off it, would that be quite a cool modern day interpretation of the Blues Brothers?
No.
Okay, why?
Because it's essentially We were talking about police cars last episode, and all cop cars are basically economy spec average cars, aren't they? And that's what you'd end up with, an economy spec average car. I know there's a scene for these sorts of things. It doesn't really do it for me. I think this is more for you a flashback to how many times you've been nicked for speeding, and probably just a flashback to being in the back of one. Is it cuffed?
Like the Blues Brothers, it's got new brakes and discs, new suspension, new police rear axle, whatever that is. I think they're quite cool, those Crown Vics, and they're really comfortable. So I wouldn't mind tooling around in one of those.
Nah. Next, what you got?
Well, this is the ultimate. And I've seen these at car shows and I've just gone weak at the knees at them. But again, it's the size. But my God, I would love one of these. So this is a 1969 Dodge Charger RT 440. So this is the Dukes of Hazzard Dodge Charger, but I prefer to think about it as the Bullet chase car. This one's in black. It's got the chrome wheels. It just looks so sinister. It's got to be the most sinister looking car in the world ever. And I would just love one of those. But in Britain, again, bit big and a little bit unwieldy.
Price on request. We don't like a price on request, do we? That means it's expensive.
Yeah, I think where are you going to store it? Because it won't fit in a garage. You have to put it in storage with something big. It's an American car. At some point in Britain, you're going to meet a corner. And that's when all of a sudden the whole thing falls apart. And I think that's the problem here, isn't it? These are the cars I think, particularly the Dodge Charger, best left in your imagination.
Well, what do you think? Do you agree with us? Are American cars a little bit too unwieldy to take on as a classic? Or are they an interesting choice? Let us know. You can follow us on our Instagram channel at the Tyre Kickers UK. Leave a comment. Tell us we're right or tell us we're wrong.
So time now for Crush It or Caress It. This time, it's the Ford Capri.
This is Ford Capri, as luxurious as a limousine, powerful as a sports car, with a choice of engines including a new 3-litre V6, with a range of models to give you exactly the car you want. Ford Capri, the car you always promised yourself.
Yes, the legendary car that was named after an exotic Italian island and was supposed to be the answer to the huge selling American Mustang. That, of course, was iconic in the States. The Capri was also iconic in the UK, but a lot of them ended up in later years as the car most likely to be jacked up on bricks under a tarpaulin on someone's drive.
It was a Cortina in drag and shared some really weedy engines with other slow blue ovals. So the Capri, Matt, what's your instinct on this? Do you like it or do you hate it?
My instinct is this feature is yet again we're going to upset a large section of the classic car owners. I mean, the Capri to a lot of people is legendary, but I think it's one built on, like a lot of classic cars, nostalgia. You either were there or you wanted one. It was a pin-up car, and for a lot of people it's now become something, well, it did become something that was affordable. Now values are shot through the roof. Do I like them personally? Not so much. What about you?
Well, I like, it's a bit more nuanced, to be honest. I really like the Mark I, the 1969 to 1974. That's my favourite. Yeah. But then the Capris, I think, were ruined by the kind of wheezy engines. The 1.3L was only 55 horsepower. The 1.6 was 76 horsepower. They were all show and no go. And by the time they got to the Mark II version, and that's the one that was used by Terry McCann in Minder, they lost a lot of that design purity. It was edged off. It was shaped off. It didn't quite work as well as the Mark I think. And actually, that reminds me of the Mark II. I once wrote a letter of complaint to the TV Times because in Minder, they used two different Capris for one chase sequence. One was an L and one was a GL. And I wrote to the TV Times and complained and had that letter published when I was 9 saying, it's a different kind of car on the chase scene.
Clearly started with an early age with you.
But I do think the Mark I, and I'm going to put one on your screen now. This is a 1970 Ford Capri 3000 GT. Now, this is just gorgeous. It's on Rostar wheels. Ooh, it's silver. Yeah. It's got the black vinyl roof. I think the Mark I is just a beautiful, beautiful car. You must like that. It's even got a black bonnet to make it look a bit more racy.
That's nice, isn't it?
That is nice. And also, it's a nice price, isn't it? Already, it's at £27,000 for a Capri. I mean, these things were made to a price. So the fact that they're getting this big money now is a sign that lots of people do like them. I mean, maybe not us as much as other people, but they are nice as a design. And I do think those early designs are great. It was just ruined later on. And the 3000s, I do remember the touring cars when the Capri 3100 RS, I think, that used to be a fantastic car to see bouncing off the racing circuits of Britain. So they did have a good pedigree. I just think they were ruined by the later ones.
Yeah, these Mark 1s are nice. This one, as you say, is in sort of like almost like gunmetal metallic. No, it's a bit lighter than that, sort of a dark silver, I suppose. It's got a black bonnet, which I'm not sure goes, black vinyl roof. I'd maybe change that bonnet, get that resprayed. But inside, let's have a little look inside, because are they quite basic? Yeah, they are sort of basic. Is that the original interior? God, I sound like a nerd now. But is that the original interior? Because that looks a little bit too modern for that car.
That is the original steering wheel. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the seats, but that does look original. It's got some furry dice on it. Somebody's got a sense of humour. But yeah, that looks pretty original, to be honest. It's got the kind of wooden surround on the dials, so that looks pretty good. I mean, I really like that car. I think it was just ruined by the later ones. And I'm going to show you an example of a later one. This is a 1984 Ford Capri 1.6 Laser. Now, when you get down to the 1.6s, they were so slow and they were just gutless. And I think these are the cars that ruined the Capri. This is a nice one. It's a blue. It's got a bit of silver on it. It's got a spoiler on the back, which did absolutely nothing because they were so slow. £11,000 there for a 1984 1.6 Laser.
Yeah, I mean, this is our era, really, isn't it? This is what we remember, the Capris we saw parked in the car parks and stuff. And I don't know, it's giving me Cortina vibes. When you start looking at the pedals and the gear stick and just some of the switch gear and stuff, I'm getting an immediate flashback to being in a Cortina. It's all out the same parts bin, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think by 1984... tastes had changed. You know, the Golf GTI was something that people were looking at. Even in Fords, you know, people were more keen to have an XR2, an XR3, maybe an XR4. I think the Capris dated quite quickly. Even though they carried on for a couple more years after this in the UK, they'd had their time. And then these models that come out now, the 1.6 lasers, not great. I think the 2 litres, okay. 3 litre S, really nice. But it's just the image, isn't it? It's not quite right. But they do command a hell of a lot of money now.
The one thing that does make a Capri worse, though, is a body kit. And have a look at this one, 1984 Ford Tickford Turbo Capri, the full body kit, front, side and back. You're going to tell me this is some sort of special one, but to me that just looks like it's done a drive-by in Halfords.
That is horrendous, isn't it? That's actually making me feel a little bit sick. It's got some fake wood on the dashboard, because obviously you'd need fake wood in a Tickford Turbo. I think these turbos, they were a genuine Tickford conversion, so it was around at the time, and I think people find them quite collectible, but that is ugly. I mean, they've made the Mark III Capri even uglier by putting a load of really cheap spoilers on it. But this is how crazy the prices are. The guide price of this at auction is £45,000 to £50,000. It looks vile.
Doesn't do it. I'd rather go back to that first one, that 1971, that Mark 1, although it's not quite all in line for me. I think that's really nice sort of period car, and I could use that. I'm not a massive fan of Fords, really do it for me, but I'm very conscious as we say this, though, not to be too snooty about these things, because it comes back to, you know, our mantra is usable classics, and classics you can get out and enjoy. And I think if you rocked up somewhere in this 1970s one, I think I'd want to look. I think it's interesting enough, isn't it? It's got that periodness to it. It's a very 60s car, and it's sort of predates me and, well, you to a certain extent, but it predates
Less
us.
so me.
A little bit. And I think it's interesting enough. It's quite dated now, isn't it?
It is dated. That's why I think if you look back at the beginning, those Mark 1s, they're really cool. I think it was ruined after that. But I'd certainly go and have a look at one. If one was parked up, I mean, maybe not the Tickford Turbo. I think I might walk past that one. But if that Mark 1 was parked up, I'd go and crawl all over that and have a good look at the engine. The 3-litre Essex V6. And they were made all over Europe. They're very popular. They made nearly 2 million of them. They made them in South Africa, in Germany. They were successful. So as a sales event, a Capri is a success. It's just, I think they probably lived for a bit too long in this country. They should have been killed off in the early 80s.
So what are we saying? Are we erasing the laser? Are we crushing it? Are we caressing it? What are we doing with Capris?
I would crush everything from 1976 onwards. Which is a bit specific, but yeah, I think the Mark IIs were a bit bland. The Mark III's not as nice. I think we need to put the Mark I on a plinth and caress it. The rest of them, not so sure. What about you?
I think for me, the Mark 1s look the business. The 80s ones just don't really do it for me, but each to their own, I suppose. So I think we've got to play safe. It is a British institution after all, and I would probably caress most of them.
So, Matt, that's it for this week. We've insulted enough people. If you want to try and get in touch with us, use our Instagram page. You'll find us at the Tyre Kickers UK. It's the orange logo with an old Porsche on it.
You'll also find all the links to listen to the show on your favourite podcast service there. Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, we're all on there. There's also just a link to play it straight away as well if you're not subscribed to any of those.
Now, next time, episode 4, a treat for all the trolley dollies. See it, want it, is the Dolomite Sprint.
And it's almost that time for the red forehead. Yes, spring is almost here, so we'll take a look at our favourite drop tops, the Roadster, for every occasion. But for now, that wraps up episode 3 of the Tyre Kickers. See you next time. I'm never quite sure if it's my mic is really loud in my headphones or just I'm really loud.
I think you're really loud.
Coming up this episode, See It, Want It, the gorgeous Mercedes Pagoda SL. And my screen's just gone off.
Have you not learnt it? Have you not learnt your lines?
No, sorry, that's very cool.
Keep going, love, keep going.
Let me just turn off my screensaver quickly. I don't want to not be able to have access to jokes when you start talking.
Google them quickly. Joke.
All right, here we go then. Okay, so here we go.
I had a comment on Instagram. I put a picture of my Porsche fixing it, and somebody put, I don't know who it was, somebody put, are you parting it out?
There's some very rude people on the internet.